The Mumonkan, case 41, the gateless gate. Bodhidharma sat in zazen facing the wall. The second patriarch, who had been standing in the snow, cut off his arm and said, "My mind is not yet at peace. I beg you, teacher, please give it peace." And Bodhidharma said, "Bring the mind to me, and I will set it at rest." The second patriarch said, "I have exhaustively searched for this mind, and ultimately it is ungraspable." And Bodhidharma said, "I have thoroughly set it at rest for you." So the second Zen patriarch, who's Ekadaishi, is the 24th ancestor from Shakyamuni Buddha. And he was born to elderly parents whose childless father prayed for a long time to have a child. And then one night, the room became filled with strange light, and his wife conceived a child. And due to that, they named him Ko, which means light. And the character Ko is in actually Shinko's name, same light. So Yasutani Roshi, who's my teacher, Maizumi Roshi's teacher, one of his teachers, told us that his mother had prayed for a child, and she swallowed a bead from her mala, in order to show how sincere she was. She didn't cut off her arm like Eka did, but she swallowed a bead from her mala. And when Yasutani Roshi was born, his fist was clutched, and they opened it up, and there was a mala bead in it. Now, if you're a biologist or an anatomist, it doesn't make any sense at all. But that's what he said. So that's the power of prayer. But Ko was extraordinarily ambitious in his youth, and he read many books in Taoism. And he paid no attention to family matters, and he roamed the hills. And later he studied Buddhist texts, came to understand their inner meaning by himself, and he was ordained a monk and traveled from lecture to lecture until he settled down in Mount Ko and did zazen for 8 years. And one night, during meditation, he was visited by a spirit who said, "You desire to attain the fruit. Why do you stay here? The great Tao is not far off. You should go south." Taking this to be a spiritual voice, he changed his name to Shinko, which means spiritual light. But the Shin and Shinko means body, though our Shinko. So her name is Body of Light, is a spiritual light. So the following morning, he awakened to a severe pain in his head and felt as though a thorn was piercing his head, and his teacher attempted to treat him and decided it was no ordinary illness. He said it has to do with a great change in character and disposition. And when Ko told his teacher his vision, his teacher observed a protuberance had arisen on Ko's head, resembling 5 mountain peaks. Thereupon he said, "This phrenological sign is an auspicious omen. The spirit ordered you to go south to the 5 peaks where Bodhidharma of Shorinji resides. He is undoubtedly your teacher." Ko immediately set out to the south. And when he arrived, Bodhidharma would give him no instruction. On December 9th, it snowed heavily in the night, and Shinko stood firmly without moving. By dawn, the falling snow had piled so high it reached his knees. And Bodhidharma took pity on him and said, "What are you seeking standing in the snow for so long?" And Shinko sobbed and in tears begged him, "Please, Master, have mercy. Open the gate of nectar, deliver the message that liberates sentient beings." And then Bodhidharma said, "The supreme, unequaled spiritual way of the Buddhas is accessible only after eons of striving to overcome the impossible and to bear the unbearable. How could a man of small virtue, little wisdom, slight interest, and slow mind attain the true vehicle? Striving for it would be a vain effort." So what if your spiritual teacher said that to you? How would you react? So you know what Shinko did? Drew out his knife and cut off his arm, placing it in front of Bodhidharma. So Bodhidharma, seeing this, said, "All Buddhas in search of the way have begun by ignoring their bodies for the sake of the Dharma. Now you have cut off your arm, you may have the right disposition." Still not 100% convinced, he said. So Shinko said, "May you hear about the Dharma seal of the Buddhas?" And Bodhidharma said, "The Dharma seal is not something that can be heard about from others. In other words, you have to see it for yourself. No matter how much somebody else talks about it, that's not it." So then the main case took place, and he said, "My mind is not at ease. Please pacify it for me." And Bodhidharma said, "Bring it to me, and I'll pacify it. Bring me your mind." And Ko said, "I've exhaustively searched for this mind, and ultimately it's ungraspable." Bodhidharma said, "Then I've pacified it for you." So let's look at these lines a little bit. And how do they relate to us? I mean, sure, I don't think any of us, nobody throughout the history of Buddhism really has that kind of resolve to cut off your arm, after standing in the snow all night. But what kind of resolve do we have? He said, after exhaustively searching. What was this exhaustively? That means you don't give up. You just keep going. You just keep looking. He wasn't looking for his mind. He was looking for peace. But somehow he hadn't quite let go. Always it comes down to our ego grasping, holding on to some image of ourselves. And that's what the Buddha said, that there is no self. It's just something we fabricate. But if there's no self, how am I going to function? How am I going to survive? very nicely, because the self is what causes all the suffering. At least our image of the self, our idea of what the self is. And he says, I've exhaustively searched for it. See, the character for mind in Chinese and Japanese is Shin. So the Shin means a lot of things. But actually, it's the Shin in my name. Shishin is heart. It means mind and heart, same word. So we could say, I've exhaustively searched for the heart, the essence of who I am, what I am. So there's one of the chapters of Dogen starts out, it says, the way is perfect and all pervading. And Maizumi Roshi taught us that there's a few Japanese characters in there that usually aren't translated, and it says, after exhaustively searching, the way is perfect and all pervading. There's always two aspects of things. One of them is the intrinsic, which means everything is perfect as it is. And the other is the experiential. And if you don't experience that way, it to be that way, it's not true. So you have to learn to merge your experience with the intrinsic teachings. And we do that after exhaustively searching. It just doesn't happen. And, if we look at the lives of all the teachers, Ekka's, or Ko, and he changed his name to Eka, but Ko is an example. Just how determined he was. He sat on the mountain for 8 years before he went to see Bodhidharma. And then he says, I find that the mind or the heart is ungraspable. Now, if we look at that carefully, is he saying, I can't grasp it? Or is he saying the very nature of mind is that it's ungraspable? So this thing that we're all trying to accomplish, whatever it is when we're sitting, everybody has their own intention and own impetus to practice. And I think everybody's reasons for practicing are perfectly valid. But some people just really want to clarify this basic issue of life. What is my life about? What is it for? And what about the suffering due to old age, sickness, and death? And that's what motivated the Buddha, trying to discover how to eliminate the suffering due to that. So ultimately, it's ungraspable. We just have to learn to be comfortable in the unknown. Everybody wants to feel safe and secure. But that's not the nature of life. So you're going against the very flow, because we don't know what's going to happen. Some people have a 40-year plan for their career, where they're going to be at each stage. But you don't know how things are going to turn out. We have to be flexible. So when Ko said that it's ungraspable, then Bodhidharma said, well then, what's the problem? That's it, right there. It's pacified. You got it. It's ungraspable. Yeah. So if you read a case like this, you might wonder, well, what is a peaceful mind? Can I attain a peaceful mind? And so right there, we have a problem, because mind, or at least the thinking mind, is never peaceful. So millions of thoughts taken together give the impression or the illusion of a mind. And when we practice Zazen, if we just watch the thoughts, the gaps between the thoughts grow. And my teacher, Maizumi Roshi, said that just sitting, which we call shikantazu, which some people practice here, that means to stop and observe. Stop and observe. Years ago, I was on an airplane flight going to a scientific conference with a professor from University of California. He was an ecologist. And we were looking out the window and all the clouds and the landforms. And he said, you can see certain things here, but as an ecologist, he said, the best thing is to go on foot and sit and just stop and observe and see what's going on. I mean, even driving through a landscape, you see certain things, but you don't really see how it's functioning, how all the animals and the plants are interacting unless you really just stop. Even hiking, you miss things. Because, animals hear you and hide, so forth. So if you just stop, what do we see? So we are not the thoughts that we have. In fact, I would argue that the thoughts can really confuse us. We all have stories in our mind. In fact, it's probably some of the best stories occur when we're sitting in Zazen. The elaborate stories, but we're always the center of it, always the protagonist. We love stories where we're the hero or the heroine. But thoughts arise and then they decay. And they come and go like clouds in the sky. Yeah. So Master Bankei was very clear on this point. He said, as long as you deliberately try to stop your arising thoughts, the thought of trying to stop them wars against the continually arising thoughts, and there's no end to it. Well, you may wonder, then what can I do to stop them? So even if, despite yourself, thoughts of clinging and craving and lust arise, just let them come. Don't develop them any further, and don't attach to them. And without concerning yourself about whether to stop your arising thoughts or not to stop them, just don't bother with them, and there's nothing else they can do but stop. When there's no one there to fight with, things can't help but simply come to an end of themselves. That's not only true in your own mind, but it's true in relationships too. Two people are confronting each other and one of them the other one doesn't have anything to push against. So what are you going to do? So let all the thoughts come in. Just be a good host. But and a good host in that you let them come in, but you don't need to entertain them. Don't concern yourself whether a thought is good or bad, or whether it's an internal critic that's judging you and trying to make you feel shameful or guilty for something. Just don't identify with the thoughts. They're just thoughts. They're not your thoughts. They're just thoughts. So there's a quote from Bodhidharma where he said, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. In the Dharma, in which nothing can be owned, even your thoughts, says a thought of obtaining violates the precepts. So if you think this is my thought that's telling me that I'm unlovable or that I did the wrong thing or I wasn't appropriate, just let it pass through. I mean, if you need to modify your behavior, be aware of it. Just be aware of any suffering you're causing to yourself and others, but don't cling to it. Thoughts are just too complicated, and the only way to develop sound meditative technique is to take something simple and ordinary. So unless you take something simple like the breath is what we focus on, you'll be in conflict as to what's real and what's not. And we'll ponder ad nauseum your relationship to your emotional and psychological state and worry about its significance. Keep it simple. Breathing and walking do not require that we associate with any kind of thinking. And thinking does not have the kind of precision that meditation requires. It's not that thinking isn't important, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't analyze our motives and behavior. But ultimately, in meditation, we quiet the mind and let the wisdom arise. Like one of my favorite lines in affirming trust in heart-mind is, don't seek for the truth, just cease to cherish your opinions. The truth is always there, like the sun is always shining. Just let it go. Let go all of your opinions, and the truth will appear. When it's no longer obscured and obfuscated. Actually, talking about the sun, apparently there's an eclipse going on at this very moment. Eclipse of the sun, so don't look up at it. But you can take a piece of paper and poke a hole in it and then look at the shadow and you'll see the stages. It's not a full eclipse anywhere in the country because the moon is too far away from the earth at this moment, but there's an annular ring in some places. I think the nearest to us is in the Four Corners in southwest Colorado, but we'll miss it this time. But if you look outside and see a shadow of the sun through the leaves or something, you'll see the moon covering part of it. But that's what our opinions and judgments and projections do. They obscure the sunlight of wisdom. And not just partially, completely. Full eclipse. Yeah. So when this meditation that we do, it requires patience and steadfastness. Like the example of trying to start a fire by rubbing two sticks together. When it starts to get warm, if you decide, I don't feel like doing it anymore, and stop, you're never going to get the fire. So that's the example that we often use. But so Bodhidharma changed the name of Shinko to Eka. I have somewhere in here what it means. I'll get to it. And he was 40 years old when he stood in the snow and cut off his arm. And he stayed with Bodhidharma for 8 more years. And yeah, here, the name Eka means potential for the Dharma. So he still felt he hadn't realized his potential yet, but he had the potential. So Bodhidharma once said, when you still all conditions externally, and when there's no more grasping by the mind internally, the mind becomes immovable, then you will enter the way. That reminds me of the sixth patriarch, Huineng, definition of Zazen. You know, Zazen means literally, Za means sitting, and Zen means meditation. So Zen Buddhism is a branch of Buddhism that practices meditation, or puts most of its focus on meditation and sitting meditation. But the sixth patriarch said that Za means without any obstruction anywhere, outwardly or under all circumstances, not to activate thoughts. And Zen is internally to see our original nature and to not be confused. So internally and externally to be clear. During the 8 years that Eka, which is his name now, was with Bodhidharma, another dialogue took place, which actually was his Eka's final awakening experience, or his ultimate one, and it's recorded in a collection of koans called the Denko Roku, which means transmission of light, and that collection of koans includes the enlightenment experiences, starting with the Buddha, all the way through Dogen and his successor, Koan Ejo. It was compiled by Keizan, who was a great-grandson of Dogen and also a founder of Soto School in Japan. And so this is the 27th case in that book. And it says that the 29th patriarch, Great Master Eka, studied with the 27th patriarch, the Venerable Bodhidharma, and served him. And one day he said to the patriarch, I have already put an end to all conditions. So Eka said this. And Bodhidharma said, doesn't that result in death if you wiped out all conditions? And he said, it does not result in death. Then Bodhidharma said, what's your point? He said, I'm always aware. Therefore, words are inadequate. And then Bodhidharma said, this is the mind substance realized by all Buddhas. Have no doubt. So this awareness before words arise, before thoughts arise, what is that? I was just reading something by a Dharma sister, chosen Roshi, who's in Oregon, and she said that there's a state where it's not a trance, it's not dissociation, it's just awareness. Awareness without, even before thoughts arise. And there was a big forum discussing this, some words of Zen words that were Dogen said when you're practicing Shikantaza, he said, think non-thinking, you know. And we said, well, what's non-thinking? Somebody asked, and he said, how do you think non-thinking? And he said, non-thinking. And so there's this big discussion. What do these Japanese words really mean? You know, beyond thinking, some people said, but non-thinking, what is non-thinking? That's as Satan chose and said, there's an awareness there. And that's what Eka is saying here. He's beyond conditions, but he's still aware. Yeah. You know, the silly jokes about how many Zen Buddhists does it take to change a light bulb? No. Two, one to change the light bulb and one to not change the light bulb. But I just heard one about Vipassana practitioners. So one of you practice a lot of Vipassana. Vipassana practitioners don't change the light bulb. They just sit there and say dark, 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 dark. So whatever state we're in, just to totally embody it. But then, because we're aware before thinking doesn't mean we don't function. I think we function very clearly. So this koan's a very profound koan, being aware, but not resulting in death. So sometimes we feel hunger, sometimes we're sleepy. But how can we be independent of conditions? No, it's not nihilism, it's just being aware. See, conditions always change. Sometimes I'm a teacher, sometimes I'm a student, sometimes I'm a father, sometimes I'm a brother. So if you're really hungry, be hungry. It's like the story of, or the koan of Tozan, who was asked by a monk, how do you avoid the extremes of hot and cold? And Tozan said, go to that place where there's no hot and no cold. And the monk said, where's that place? And he said, when you're hot, be hot, and when you're cold, be cold. So if you think about it and talk about it, you're not just being cold, or you're not just being hot. And if you're hungry, if you're thinking, oh man, I'm not going to survive another period until lunch, just feel, what does it feel like? Stay present. And if we really stay present with a hunger, what happens? If you stay present with a cold, what happens? If you really become one, no separation, then there is no hunger, no cold, no self. That's the point. And due to his spiritual maturity, Eka received the robe and bowl from Bodhidharma and became the second Chinese patriarch. And when Bodhidharma was about to die, he had 4 senior disciples, and he gathered them around him and he said, I want each of you to show me your understanding. And Tao Fu answered, the function of Tao cannot be grasped through literal knowledge, nor is it apart from literal knowledge. And Bodhidharma said, you've gained my skin. And the nun Tsang Chir said, it's like Ananda's glimpse of the realm of Buddha. It may be seen in oneness, but never in duality. And he said, you've gained my flesh. And Tao Yu said, the 4 elements are originally empty. The 5 aggregates do not exist. And in my comprehension, there's not a single thing to be found. Bodhidharma said, you've gained my bone. And then Eka remained silent. And Bodhidharma said, you've gained my marrow. So there's a tendency to think that one's better than the other, but I don't know what we can do without our skin. So they're all complete successors of him, but of course he gave the robe and bowl to Eka. And he told them that the robe and bowl symbolize the approved mind in order to gain trust and to have proof But after 200 years, it will not be necessary, since the Dharma will have spread. And before he died, Bodhidharma apparently wrote this verse. Originally, I came to this land to rescue deluded people by transmitting the Dharma. One flower will open with 5 petals, and the fruit will ripen by itself. So some scholars say that this one flower will open to 5 petals. It turns out that there were 5 schools of Zen in China. Only 2 of them continue, the Soto and the Rinzai, but there are 3 other schools. And he says the fruit will ripen by itself. You know, he planted the seed, and it will ripen. So then Eka went to the capital and expounded the Dharma for 34 years to monks, nuns, and lay people. And sometimes he would wander into the wine shops, brothels, butcher shops, and would consort with those in the lower castes. And when people questioned him about his behavior, he would say, I myself make my mind harmonious. What concern is this of yours? So later, while he was lecturing in front of a temple inhabited by Dharma Master Benwa, all of the temple students went to hear Eka, and the Dharma Master Benwa was furious and brought false charges against Eka. But the magistrate was deceived and passed a death sentence. And Eka had earlier told his successor, Sosan, that he had a debt to pay from a previous existence. And Eka was put to death at the age of 107. And he wrote this verse. He said, for years I suffered in snow and frost. Now I am startled at pussy willows falling. So he came to peace. So, according to another verse that Bodhidharma wrote, it said that Zen is a special tradition outside the scriptures. There's no dependence on words and letters. It directly points to one's heart, seeing into one's own nature and attaining Buddhahood. So I hope you're inspired by Master Eka and Bodhidharma. And still have another day of Zazen. So please quiet your mind, focus on your breath, just maintain awareness without thinking. Yeah. And as always, just be steadfast and continue your practice. Okay.